My hands were trembling when I set the gravy boat down on the counter. Not from the heat. From what I had just heard my daughter say in that quiet, steady voice of hers, the kind of voice a 9-year-old should never have to use. The kind that sounds like she has been carrying something heavy for a very long time and has finally decided to put it down in the middle of everyone. My brother was already pushing his chair back from the table. My mother had gone pale. And my sister-in-law Sandra was gripping the edge of the tablecloth so hard her knuckles had turned white. I had spent the last 3 years telling myself that things would get better on their own. That family was family. That Lily was tough. That kids worked things out. That I was probably reading too much into it. I had told myself all of those things, and I had believed them, because believing them was easier than what came next. I know now that I was wrong, and I know exactly when I started lying to myself. I should explain the house first, because it matters. My grandparents built it in 1971 on a half-acre lot in a quiet part of outside Columbus. It was a wide, 2-story colonial with a wraparound porch and a barn-red front door my grandmother repainted every spring without fail. When my grandfather passed, he left it to my grandmother. When she passed 6 years ago, she left it to me, not to my parents, not split between the family, but specifically to me, because I was the one who had driven her to chemotherapy every Tuesday for 11 months and slept on her couch the last 2 weeks of her life so she would not be alone. My parents accepted this without much argument at the time. My brother Derek did not. He had never said it outright. But in the years since, I had felt it in the way he talked about the house whenever the family gathered there, the way he said our place or the family home, as if my grandmother's will was a technicality rather than a decision. He was 41 years old, an operations manager at a logistics company, and he had never once helped repaint that front door. But he spoke about that house like it belonged to him in some way that paperwork had simply failed to acknowledge. Our parents had always been softer with Derek. I understood it intellectually. He was the firstborn, the son, the one who had gone to a state school on a partial scholarship, while I stayed local and took on a second job to pay my own tuition. They were not cruel people. They just had a particular way of looking at things, where Derek's problems were urgent and mine were manageable, where Derek's feelings needed to be handled carefully and mine were assumed to be fine. I had learned to make myself fine. I had gotten very good at it. When my marriage ended 4 years ago, I moved back into my grandmother's house with Lily, who was 5 at the time. Derek and Sandra lived about 20 minutes away. We saw them at holidays, sometimes more. Mason was 13 when Lily was 9, which meant they were not exactly playmates, but they were family, and I had wanted Lily to have a sense of that: cousins, grandparents, Sunday dinners. I had wanted her to have what I had grown up with, before I started noticing the parts of it that were less than I remembered. I noticed something was wrong with Lily in September. It was subtle at first. She stopped mentioning Mason's name when she talked about family visits. She got quiet in the car on the way to my parents' house. One afternoon she asked me, very casually, whether it was possible to be related to someone and still not like them. I told her yes, of course, and asked her if there was something she wanted to talk about. She shook her head and went back to her homework. I should have pushed harder. I know that now. By October, she had started flinching slightly when the doorbell rang unexpectedly. She told me she had bumped her arm on the gym equipment at school when I noticed a red mark above her wrist. I believed her, because she said it without hesitation, and because I did not want to believe the alternative. I told myself I would watch more closely. I told myself she would come to me when she was ready. Thanksgiving was the last Thursday of November. I cooked most of it myself: the turkey, the sweet potato casserole, the green beans with the crispy shallots my grandmother used to make. My parents arrived at noon with a store-bought pie and a bottle of wine. Derek and Sandra arrived at 12:30 with Mason, who walked in with his hands in his pockets and didn't make eye contact with me or Lily. Lily was in the kitchen helping me arrange the breadbasket when they came in. I watched her from the corner of my eye. The moment she heard Mason's voice in the entryway, something shifted in her posture. It was barely perceptible, just a slight drawing inward, shoulders moving a fraction closer together. She kept arranging the rolls. She did not look up. We sat down to dinner around 2 o'clock. My parents were at either end of the table. Derek and Sandra sat across from me. Mason sat next to his father, and Lily sat beside me, close enough that our arms were touching. Everything was fine for the first hour. My mother talked about a new walking group she had joined. My father asked Derek about a promotion he was being considered for. Sandra complimented the sweet potato casserole and asked for the recipe, which she had asked for 3 years running and never made. Lily ate quietly and answered when spoken to, and seemed, from the outside, perfectly all right. It was when I got up to get the gravy that I heard it. I had my back to the table, standing at the stove, when Mason said something in a low voice that I couldn't fully make out. Something with the word baby in it, or maybe crybaby. The tone was enough. It was the tone of someone who had said something like it many times before and had never been told to stop. When I turned around, Lily's face was very still. The way a face gets still when it has been trained to be still. I was about to say something. I was already opening my mouth when Lily looked directly at Mason across the table and said, in the calmest, most level voice I have ever heard from a child, "You should tell them what you did to my arm. And the time before that. And the time before that." Nobody moved. Mason went red. Not the red of embarrassment, the red of someone caught. My brother looked at his son, then he looked at me. Then he pushed his chair back and said, "She's exaggerating." "How do you know?" I asked. My voice came out steadier than I expected. "I haven't said anything yet." Because that's just how she gets when Mason teases her a little. It's normal kid stuff. "You're too protective, Rachel. You always have been." Sandra was nodding. My mother was looking at her plate. I looked at Lily. "Sweetheart, can you show me your arm?" She pulled up her sleeve. There was a bruise on the inside of her forearm, oblong and yellowed at the edges, maybe 5 or 6 days old. I had seen the mark before, when it was newer. I had believed the story about the gym equipment. The table was very quiet. My father cleared his throat and said, "Now, let's not make a bigger thing out of this than it needs to be." "She bruised my daughter," I said. "Mason," Derek said sharply, "did you do that?" Mason was looking at the table. He didn't answer. That was its own answer. "Okay," Derek said, exhaling through his nose. "Okay, so maybe it got a little rough, but you know how kids are." "She is 9 years old," I said. "He is 14. That is not rough play. That is a 14-year-old hurting a 9-year-old and nobody calling it what it is." "Rachel." My mother's voice had that particular quality to it, the one I had heard my entire life, the one that meant I was overreacting. "Derek and Sandra are right here. We can talk about this as a family. We don't need to." "Need to what?" She looked at my father. He gave her a very small nod. "We don't need to blow this out of proportion," she said. "Mason is a good kid. He's just at a difficult age. We can talk to him, make sure it doesn't happen again. These things are better handled within the family." I sat with that for a moment. I looked at my daughter, who was sitting very straight in her chair with her sleeves still pushed up, waiting to see what I would do next. She had been waiting to see what I would do for months. She had been hoping, in the quiet, patient way children hope for things, that I would finally do it. "How long?" I asked her. She looked at me. "Since the 4th of July cookout. 5 months. I had spent 5 months watching my daughter flinch at doorbells and stay quiet in the car, and ask me whether it was possible to not like someone you were related to, and I had told myself it was fine, that kids worked things out, that I was being overprotective. I stood up from the table. "Rachel," Derek said, "sit down, we're eating." "I'm not sitting down." I went to the kitchen, picked up my phone, and called the police's non-emergency line. "I want to report an ongoing assault on a minor," I said. I gave our address. The woman on the line asked me to stay on the premises and said someone would be there within the hour. I walked back to the dining room doorway. "The police are coming," I said. "If anyone wants to leave before they get here, that's your choice. But I'm going to tell them everything." Sandra made a sound that I can only describe as theatrical. "You're calling the police on your own nephew at Thanksgiving dinner. Do you know how insane that is? I know that your son has been hurting my daughter for 5 months, and no one in this family said a word to me." "We didn't know," Derek started. "He knew," Lily said quietly. We all looked at her. She was still sitting straight. "Mason told me not to tell because nobody would believe me anyway. He said his parents would just say I was being dramatic." The room was silent in a different way after that. The kind of silence that happens when something true lands in the middle of a conversation and everyone has to figure out whether to acknowledge it or pretend they didn't hear it. My father pushed back from the table and went to stand near the window. My mother started crying softly in a way that was more about her own discomfort than about her granddaughter. Derek looked at his son. Mason was still staring at the table, and in that moment, he looked less like a bully and more like a boy who had learned that behavior from somewhere, which made me angrier rather than less, because learning it somewhere did not make it acceptable to practice on my child. The officers arrived 40 minutes later. 2 of them, a man and a woman, professional and calm. I sat with Lily in the living room while they spoke to everyone separately. Lily told them about 4 specific incidents. She remembered dates, locations, what had been said beforehand. My daughter, who I had underestimated in ways that still make me ashamed, had been documenting it in her head the entire time, waiting for the moment I was ready to listen. The officers took photographs of the bruise. They spoke with Mason in the kitchen with his parents present. I later learned that he admitted to 2 of the 4 incidents. The officers told me I could pursue the matter formally, that given Mason's age and the documentation, there were options available to me. They gave me a case number and the name of a family advocate at the county courthouse. After they left, Derek stood in my entryway with his coat on and said, "I hope you're happy. You just ruined Thanksgiving." I looked at him and felt something I had been carrying for years simply stop. Not break, not dissolve, just stop, the way a noise stops when someone finally turns off the machine that was making it. "I want you to know," I said, "that this house, which you have always spoken about like it belongs to you, will never be a place where my daughter is not safe. If that means you don't come here anymore, then that is the consequence of what your son did and what you chose to overlook. Mom and Dad gave you that house. Your grandmother gave me this house," I said, "because I was there when it counted. You can have a lot of feelings about that, Derek, but not in my entryway." He left. Sandra left without looking at me. Mason followed them with his hands in his pockets the same way he had arrived. My parents stayed another 20 minutes, uncomfortable and quiet. My mother said she hoped I would think carefully about how I wanted to handle things with the family going forward. My father said Mason was a good kid who had made some mistakes. I told them I loved them and that I needed them to go home. When the door closed behind them, I went to the living room where Lily was sitting on the couch with a blanket pulled over her lap, eating one of the dinner rolls she had carried in from the table. She looked up at me. "Are you okay?" I asked. She thought about it. "I think so," she said. "Are you?" I sat down next to her. "I will be." I pulled her into my side. "I'm sorry I didn't ask sooner. I'm sorry it took me so long." She leaned against me. "You asked when I showed you," she said. "That's what mattered." We sat there for a while in the quiet house, the turkey going cold on the table and the barn-red door closed against the November evening, and I thought about my grandmother, who had given me this house because I showed up when it counted. I thought about all the ways I had confused keeping the peace with keeping my daughter safe, and how those were not the same thing, and how I had needed a 9-year-old to show me the difference. The following week, I filed the formal complaint with the county family court. My attorney advised me that given Mason's age and the admission of 2 incidents, the court would most likely order a diversion program, mandatory counseling, and a supervised period. She also advised me that I could request a civil protective order restricting Mason's access to Lily at any family gatherings. I requested it. My parents called me 3 times the week after Thanksgiving. The first call was my mother telling me that Derek was devastated. The second call was my father asking if I had considered that this would affect Mason's future. The third call was both of them together, on speaker, asking me to please reconsider the formal filing and handle it within the family. I told them, clearly and without anger, that I had tried handling things within the family for 5 months, and what that had produced was a bruise on my daughter's arm and a 9-year-old who had learned to stay silent because she had calculated that no one would believe her. I told them that I loved them and that I wanted them to be in Lily's life, but that going forward, protecting her, was not something I was willing to negotiate about, ever, with anyone. My mother cried. My father said he understood, even if he didn't fully mean it yet. It was a start. The diversion program was approved in January. Mason was ordered into 12 weeks of counseling, and a behavioral agreement was filed with the court. His parents were required to attend 2 of the sessions. I don't know what happened in those rooms, and I have made peace with not knowing. What I know is that in February, Lily came home from school and told me at dinner that she had won the geography bee in her class. She said it the way kids say things when they are genuinely proud, rather than performing happiness for the adults around them. She ate 2 helpings of pasta. She asked if we could get a dog. She laughed at a joke my father made when he called on Sunday. In March, I repainted the front door. I did the same color my grandmother always used, barn red, Benjamin Moore, the same one listed on a note card I found tucked in the kitchen drawer when I moved in. Lily helped. She did the bottom panels and I did the top, and we stood back at the end of the afternoon and looked at it in the low March light, and it was exactly right. I thought about what my grandmother had understood that I had taken a long time to learn. That showing up is not the same as being present. That keeping people comfortable is not the same as keeping people safe. And that the things worth protecting are almost always the things that require you to make someone else uncomfortable. I don't know what my relationship with my brother will look like in a year or 5 years. I don't know if my parents will fully understand what I needed them to do and didn't. Families are long, and people change slowly if they change at all. And I have stopped needing a particular outcome from any of them in order to feel like I made the right call. What I have is a daughter who tells me things now, who comes home and talks about her day and names her feelings and asks hard questions and trusts that I will take the questions seriously. She told me recently, very matter-of-factly, that she used to think adults didn't really listen to kids, but that she had changed her mind. I asked her what had changed it. She looked at me like the answer was obvious. Thanksgiving, she said. I set the gravy boat down on the counter and I turned around and I listened to my daughter, and everything that came after came from that. The barn red door is very bright in the spring when the light is right. Lily painted her name on the inside panel in tiny letters, down near the hinge where guests won't see it. I leave it there. It is her house too. That is the whole point. I want to ask you something before you go. Have you ever stayed quiet about something for too long because you thought it was easier, and then had someone show you it wasn't? Tell me in the comments. I read everyone.